Hello everyone, I welcome you all to the last lecture of this series. Today I'm going to discuss a very interesting story of Mahasweta Devi, and the name of the story is Draupadi. So let's start with the introduction part. You see, you all of you have heard of this story earlier also. Draupadi is probably one of Mahasweta Devi's most famous stories, and it has been reprinted and translated in several collections. Like most of her stories, it is set among the tribal in Bengal. Draupadi, or Draupadi as her name appears in dialect, is a rebel hunted down by the government in their attempt to subjugate these groups. Mahashweta Devi's story, Draupadi, is set against the backdrop of the Naxalite revolt. It was a major peasant rebellion that began in the late 1960s in the Naxalbari region of the Indian of West Bengal. The peasant rebellion was inevitably a caste rebellion by the largely lower caste cultivators against the upper caste feudal landowners. The uh, the revolutionary movement in favor of agrarian reform grew in response to several generations of feudal exploitation in the form of low wages, uh, exorbitant rates of interest charged by the landowners, and sexual exploitation of tribal women, among other things. So here we can simply say that this is the broader, this is a broad context within which the action of the story takes place. Moving on to the next part, the colonized versus the subaltern. The story can be analyzed under these two heads. As you know that there are two main characters, Sena Nayak and Draupadi. The relationship between colonized and tribal, or the subaltern, becomes very clear when taking a closer look at the story's two main characters, Sena Nayak and Draupadi. The former one, a local army officer, is eager to really understand the tribal people. He places confidence in the Army Handbook, which says that the most despicable and repulsive style of fighting is guerrilla warfare with primitive weapons. Sena Nayak can, in contrast to Draupadi and her husband Tulna, read, and he therefore thinks to be a cut above the tribal people. You see, if you just go through the story, you'll come to know that in the foreword written by Spivak, he argues in her foreword that the entire story is directed towards breaking the gap between theory and practice in Senanayak, and hereby marks him as the central figure of the narration. His character is in interaction with the figure of Draupadi, definitely responsible for the story's pace and for its take on dramatic scale. Nevertheless, Draupadi really seems to focus on the tribal people because their actions and thoughts mark the main uh, threads of the story. Moving on to the next part, that is the an overview of the story. So here we'll be talking about the background and the context and how the story begins. So let's start with the background part. As you know that Mahashweta Devi was a famous women's social activist writer and journalist from India who worked hard for the growth of the tribal people. I mean, there's no doubt that she was fondly called the mother of the suburbs because of her extensive work in support of the suburb tribe. She was born in Dhaka, Bangladesh in 14th January 1926, but later after the partition of India, the family moved to West Bengal. Mahasweta was born in a literate family. Both her parents were well known writers. Mahasweta also received good education. She acquired a bachelor's and master's degree in English. Basically, interested in writing, you will be surprised to know that she wrote more than 100 novels and over 20 collections of short stories. The Indian government honored Mahashweta with various literary awards, such as the Sahitya Academy Award and also the civilian awards Padma Shri and Padma Vibhushan. The legendary and glorious mother of Bengal passed away on 28th July 2016 due to multiple organ failure. Uh, Draupadi is probably one of Mahasweta Devi's most famous stories and has been reprinted and translated in several collections that we already talked about. Mahasweta becomes more and more involved with the lives and struggles of unprivileged tribal women and the atrocities inflicted on them. Mahasweta Devi's prime concern is with the underprivileged castes and tribes of West Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand, and Odisha. Despite the Indian Constitution's claim of India as a democratic and egalitarian state, social inequalities are a grim reality today. Even after years of independence, Indian society is faced with structural inequality. Talking about the story, we can simply say that the story of Draupadi is set among the tribals in Bengal. Draupadi, or Draupadi as her name appears in dialect, is a Santhal tribe girl who is vulnerable to injustice but resists the burnt of social oppression and violence with strong will and courage, and even try to deconstruct the age old structures of racial and gender discrimination. You see, the most interesting part of the story is that Draupadi Majan is portrayed as an illiterate, uneducated tribal woman. Yet she leads the politicized life among all because she is engaged in an armed struggle for the rights and freedom of the tribal people. Draupadi, or Dobdi, as her name appears in dialect, is a rebel hunted down by the government in their attempt to overcome these groups. The government uses all forces available to them, including kidnapping, murder, and rape. And any tribal deaths in custody are invariably accidents. Draupadi and her husband Dulna are on the most wanted, as you can see on the screen, most wanted list in West Bengal. They murder wealthy landlords to claim wells and tube wells, which are their main sources of water in the village. They fight for their right to basic means of nourishment. Dulna is eventually gunned down by policemen. However, Draupadi manages to escape and begins to operate, helping fugitives who have murdered corrupt property owners and landlords escape. She tactfully misleads the cops who are on her trail so that the fugitives' campsite remains a secret. However, she is finally caught and kept in police custody. I mean, this is where the story actually begins. You know, over the course of a few days, Draupadi is repeatedly raped, deprived of food and water, and tortured by multiple officers who state that their orders to make her have come from their Bade Sahib, Officer Senanayak, in charge of her case. You see, the Senanayak, an officer appointed by the government to capture Draupadi and stop her activities. The Senanayak, the military official, is a senseless, cruel officer for whom murders, assaults, counter assaults, and sadistic torture on the tribal activists reaches a point where if anyone is captured, their eyeballs, intestines, stomachs, hearts, genitals, and so on become the food for fox, vulture, hyena, wildcat, and worm. So you can imagine the situation. After days, the policemen take her back to the tent and tell her to clothe herself because it is time for her to meet Sinanayak. As the guard pushes a bucket of water forward for her to wash herself, she laughs, throws the water down, and tears the piece of cloth on her body. She proceeds to walk out of her tent towards Senanayak, naked and with her head held high. After this, Senanayak is taken back and quickly turn away his eyes from her body. She walks right up to him, hands on her hips, and says, "The object of your search, Dobdi Majan, you asked them to bake me? Don't you want to see how they made me?" When Senanayak asks where her clothes are, she replies angrily that clothes were useless because once she was stripped, she could not be clothed again. Then she spits on Senanayak with disgust and says, how can you clothe me? Are you a man? There isn't a man here that I should be ashamed. After this, she pushes Senanayak with her exposed breasts, and for the first time, he is afraid to counter an unarmed woman. So here we can simply say that she uses different weapons. In that moment, though Draupadi has no weapons, she uses her body as her greatest weapon. The body which was abused, tortured, and seen as the cause of her downfall becomes the very weapon with which she stands up for herself. She refuses to let them take advantage of her emotions, even though she has been physically assaulted. Draupadi realizes that raping women does not make the male species masculine. Now let's come to the conclusion part. As you can see on the screen, the conclusion can be discussed under two heads. One is Draupadi is in the social and cultural position of the subaltern, and we can also say that it breaks the gap between theory and practice within him. Let's try to understand what is this. You see, to sum up the discussion, we can simply say that at the beginning, the story Draupadi displays the two characters, Senanayak and Draupadi, as a dichotomy. The Western world influenced colonized army officer on the one hand, and the excluded tribal which is condemned to death on the other. Through the unusual way of writing, the text suggests that Draupadi is in the social and cultural position of the subaltern. Furthermore, it has also been proved that language plays a major role in Devi's narrative. Senanayak is obsessed with translating the tribal language in order to understand them. When applying the concept of the subaltern to the story, however, the text clearly suggests that although we are dealing with substantial power relations between the two main characters, the dichotomy begins to dissolve. A transition of power takes place in the final scene when Draupadi uh, counters her pursuer. Eventually, the tribal has a voice which she articulates through her body and therefore confronts Sena Nayak and breaks the gap between theory and practice within him. So, this is if we just talk about the last scene, which is indeed a cinematic value, brings pictures of anti-war films like the Thin Red Line, where indigenous people are killed and brutally harrowed, flashback into the reader's mind. However, the main character does not die at this point, at least nor not her body, because she's using the later one in combination with her voice to confront her murderer later on. Anyway, nevertheless, the absence of her inner feelings of the description of pain and in not elaborating on her thoughts and beliefs, the style of narration suggests that Draupadi lost her inner self when she was captured already. One could also argue that this is the aim of the next stage, to let go your feelings and your emotions in order not to get hurt or to get emotionally ripped during an encounter. The body, which is now also naked because Draupadi tears her clothes into parts instead of taking them on again, becomes the center of attention. The nakedness also makes visible that the body is really the only thing she has now. Or you can also say that, to take it on a higher level, the only thing that is left of her. Now, simply we can say that in Devi's Draupadi, the main character Draupadi is presented from the beginning of the story as a woman of strong mind and will. When she realizes that she has been caught by the authorities, her reaction is bold and daring. When she pours the water down on the ground, tears her piece of clothes with her teeth, Senanaik walks out and surprised and sees Draupadi naked, walking toward him in the bright sunshine with her head high. When astonished general questions Draupadi's unusual behavior, the empowered woman answers, "You asked them to make me up?" Don't you, don't you want to see how they made me? So here we can simply say that Draupadi uses her feminine nakedness as a weapon against her enemy. So, in a word, I would like to say that Mahashweta Devi presents Draupadi as a strong female character, transgressing sexual orientation and social standards. And finally, we can say that the story ends with a magnificent final scene in which she faces her abuser, uh, naked and bloody, but fiercely strong. Dear my students, as you know that this is the last lecture of module 5. Now I would like you to just go through the study material available with you and listen to all the lectures that have been shared with your email ID. And if you find any kind of difficulty anywhere, you just write to me at my email ID. It's Vimal, VIMALCIEFL @gmail.com. So that's all for today. Thank you very much.